To not act, when action could prevent someone else from being degraded, humiliated or abused, is unacceptable. Mandatory detention is not something to be debated. It is something to be dismantled. We cannot allow it to exist. And as long as it does exist, we have a duty to make it as difficult and expensive to implement as possible. In another country, this type of economic disincentive against violating human rights might have been imposed by the UN in the form of economic sanctions. But the Australian government is too powerful to be disciplined by the UN. The only way that a cost could be attached to mandatory detention that would be large enough to force the government to abandon the policy was if it was enforced by the Australian people ourselves. We, the Australian people, are the only ones who can end this human rights atrocity. We are constantly told that the answer to ending mandatory detention relies on smart parliamentary politics. But smart parliamentary politics is what created these gulags in the first place, and 20 years more of it has consistently made things worse. Instead, the answer to ending mandatory detention must rely on the self-organized non-violent resistance of ordinary Australian people. That was the lesson of Operation Fortitude, when the government was forced to back down in the face of a popular uprising. What was shown by this ridiculous government operation, and the demonstrations that brought it to an end, is that so long as the roads are blocked, it doesn't matter what the Prime Minister says, because control over the economy is more important to the government than almost anything else. However, what has not been well understood up until this point, is that the Australian people can non-violently shut down the economy, far more easily, and with far fewer people, than many people currently realize. In fact, even a few thousand non-violent demonstrators in each city could quickly begin to have a multi-billion-dollar impact on the Australian economy by doing nothing more than wandering towards the nearest highway on a monthly basis. This is how grassroots demonstrators can enforce economic sanctions on our own government. The economic disruption caused by even short blockades of the transportation network would be profound, especially when repeated. The CSB network manual shows how, by themselves, crowds the size of little more than 3% of the university student body could literally make mandatory detention physically impossible to implement. The CSB network aims to help facilitate this non-violent resistance by popularizing a series of public and economically important rallying points. These rallying points are spread out evenly across Australia's 5 largest cities. They are easily accessible because they are placed at public transport stops, like train stations and bus stops. Each of these easily accessible rallying points has a potential occupation site, such as a major highway, within walking distance. Can't Stand By is a decentralized network, meaning that there is no one in charge. Instead, the methods and rules for engaging in the network are laid out in the CSB network manual, which is available for free online. It is the collective agreement that holds the CSB network together. It is also where the maps to the rallying points can be found. The network manual calls for demonstrations to be held consistently so that momentum can be built. As a demonstrator, participants simply head to their nearest rallying point on the first Saturday of the month at 2 p.m. Demonstrators should make sure to bring a camera and a sign which promotes the CSB network. When you arrive at a rallying point, 2 key questions will play a determining role in what a particular demonstration will look like. Firstly, are there enough people to safely block the road? And secondly, are there any police present? Can't Stand By demonstrators occupy the roads only when it is safe to do so and unlikely to result in arrest. Also, when occupations do happen, they only last for 15 minutes. Just long enough for the group to demonstrate its capacity to shut down the road. Once that has been proven, it is then time to leave peacefully and collectively, and use media of this successful event to draw even more people into the network. When numbers get larger, the occupations can increase in length. But until numbers reach a certain threshold, simply making short, regular attempts at occupying is enough. We have no need to push through police lines, or desperately cling to an arbitrary bit of ground, in a futile attempt to make a particular action count. Instead, we recognize that if the government has been forced to deploy police to stop the demonstrators, then we have already won. Firstly, because this costs the government money. But more importantly, we have exposed them. We have shown that underneath the charade of freedom and democracy, the real reason why the brutal system of mandatory detention continues to function, is because if we get out of line, the government will send someone with a club and a gun to put you back in your place. This forces the government to show that it is dependent on violence. This is an important distinction to make because so long as people are still trying to engage with the government, all the abuses of the refugees can be chalked up, in the Labour and Liberal Party PR, to being simply the unfortunate collateral damage of a robust Western democracy. But any human being should know that debasing another human being cannot be justified by a particular number of pieces of paper in a box. This is why CSB demonstrators do not ask to gather. You don't ask to help someone who is choking. You don't wait till it is convenient either. Instead, we force the Australian government to show the world that it can only stand through the use of violent force against its own citizens. We can do this by simply trying to get as close to the road as we can. If demonstrators are stopped, either by police, or because there are not enough people to safely block the road, then we simply take a photo of our promotional signs at the point where we're stopped. The signs could be anything from a postcard to a banner. These photos are then uploaded to Twitter under the hashtag Can'tStandBy to show other potential demonstrators where there is activity in the network. This helps to raise the profile of the network and therefore increases the number of people who are able to participate in future demonstrations. A problem which protest organizers often face is a pervasive sense of apathy. People say, "I don't act, because no one else cares, and not enough people will show up." When faced with attending a demonstration, in which they may be the only participant in their area, the assumption is that this will be useless, because it will fail to capture the attention of the media or the government. But CSB demonstrations work differently to traditional protests, because they are always held at the same time and places. This means that even one person is enough, because one person makes it far more likely that another person will join them or be inspired to copy the action in their area. A lone demonstrator works in a similar way to the first person who begins dancing at a party. Once a single person begins demonstrating, all the people who wouldn't feel comfortable being the first person now have a place to demonstrate. Once two people show up, the social pressure is diffused even more. Now there's a spirit of camaraderie, playful competition, and creative defiance. We are not aiming to catch the attention of the media or the government. We are aiming to gradually build the organizational capacity of the general community to be able to shut down the economy in the event of a human rights emergency. The first step in doing this is simply to make more people aware of the existence of the Can't Stand By network and our continuous campaign of demonstrations. The first 10 people who begin regularly attending each rallying point will have a profound impact. For example, let's say that the seemingly pointless act of getting just 10 people to a rallying point was replicated across the network. This would be the equivalent of a mere 480 people in Sydney and just 130 in Adelaide, and, in most other circumstances, protests of this size could comfortably be ignored by the government, but CSB demonstrations have a different impact to a regular protest. There have been countless times in the more than 20 years since mandatory detention began, that the nation let out a collective cry of disgust at what the Australian government is doing. In these moments people take to the streets in their tens of thousands. There is no reason to think that this will not happen again. And it is in these moments that a national network of active demonstrators, who are continually inviting the general public to shut down the system, will go from being seemingly meaningless to being something which could end mandatory detention in a matter of months. All the information necessary to begin organizing Can't Stand By demonstrations can be found in the free publicly available CSB network manual. Thank you.
There's a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart, that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all. That doesn't mean that you have to break anything. 1,000 people sitting down someplace, not letting anybody by, not letting anything happen, can stop any machine, including this machine, and it will stop.
We got the guillotine, you better run.
We want to thank you for flying with us. We know you could have stayed home, just cried and cussed mail. Your guns go off if it's time to bust mail. They tanks have time to rust.